Okay. Okay, welcome everyone who is here on time, or in some cases early.
And anybody who might watch the recording later, hello to you as well.
Anybody who might watch it later. We were just saying that this is a very specific topic. But we are Legal Insights, DEI for Real, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And the real part is we attempt to reassure you, educate you, activate you so that you could be a wonderful leader in this space. So this is Nancy and I, Chris Jones, Spectra Diversity, the creator of the only assessment that measures the organization and the individual in a single survey. We have we collect demographic data, and then we also collect both qualitative and quantitative data. So very, very helpful. And Nancy.
And I am an employment attorney licensed in New York, as well as a global workplace mediator. I do a lot of my work online these days, like these webinars, but I I have been working with all kinds of employers of all different sizes for most of my career, all the way back to, as Chris and I were talking in our warm up for this webinar, all the way back to United Parcel Service, where I was then both a supervisor of administrative employees and union employees, often in the same workplace. So I've been working in and around what we would consider bargaining unit employees now, that were also blended with non-union employees most of my career. So that is where I bring that knowledge in, but I also work with some very tiny employers because I'm in New York City and we still have a lot of truly small businesses there.
Mom and pops.
That's right. And so everything in between, and there, each one is nuanced. And that's, like we were saying, this is a kind of a limited topic, but I think it's an important one to have a little bit of knowledge, because you're definitely seeing the False Claims Act in the news a lot.
Well, let's do the reassure part. And this is the first one. And this is to reassure you that you're not alone. So if you want to take your smartphone and go to the little, what you call it, symbol in the corner, and what do you know about the False Claims Act? And oops. Oh, I did it again. I can't click
Hey,
on
where'd
it
my
because
QR code go? No.
I'm the leader. I'm the leader. I'm sorry. I can't from current slide. Oh, here we go.
Happens
Yeah,
to the best of us, Chris. It's all fine.
yeah. I wanted to do it myself, and I clicked on it on that screen, which doesn't work. So, what do I know? Okay, a little bit. Nothing, nada. That was me. Nothing, nada. Yeah, I knew absolutely nothing about this. So, and Nancy and I, what we bring to these meetings is that I bring the DEI portion, although I know a little bit of law. I was a legal blogger for several years. And Nancy knows all the legal stuff, but she also knows about DEI because that has become a recent interest. So we truly do overlap here. So thank you.
And I did work in the compliance and diversity office at a college in a pretty big system.
There you go. So, False Claims Act, and you can read it, but I did not know that it went back to 1863. And it's also sometimes called the Lincoln Law. And because we're a small group today, if you have questions, just pop in and ask them, raise your hand or put it in the chat. Key Tom, did I say that right?
Quitam.
Well,
We
there you
usually
go.
say Quitam. But depending
And
on your accent, it might come out different.
okay,
I can do
okay.
that because I am from Kentucky and that is how I used to sound.
Okay, there you go. And the first time I saw that, I saw realtors, that it was, but it's relators, it's people that relate. And that is not what you not what I expected when I read that word. I thought it was something to do with real estate. So there you go. And then whistleblowing. Um, Whistleblowing. Oh, I do have a little bit about the Lincoln part of it. It was created because the Union soldiers were being sold and provided with decrepit horses and mules that were in ill health, faulty rifles and ammunition, and rancid rations and provisions, among other unscrupulous actions. So one of the things that I thought about, and this is a question Nancy and I haven't talked about, but I have been reading reports from the congressional members that have visited Alcatraz, the alligator Alcatraz, and apparently the food, some of the food has had worms in it, and it's definitely one meal a day, and it's a sandwich, and a lot of these are grown men, people that, well, a lot of people need more than one sandwich a day. But I'm wondering if there could be and I don't know how you would file it, but if there could be um, a lawsuit, a False Claims Act lawsuit on behalf of those prisoners against the government.
It could happen. I wouldn't be surprised. At this point, I'm not surprised about much of anything. Right. Every time, and I've said that throughout my legal career, but this year in particular, I always think there's not going to be much that could surprise me. And I'm always
And
wrong.
then it does. Well, that's why it's called the Lincoln Law. It was a Civil War ruling.
Right.
So by the numbers, here's just a few little facts that I found. Um, as of 2024, 83% of all FCA actions were initiated by whistleblowers. So that's most of them. They have typically involved healthcare, military, or other government actions. Although Enron was a big whistleblower case, and that wasn't government, or was that government because it was banking?
I'd really have to go back and look
Yeah,
at the Enron case, but the other thing to understand is that there are whistleblower provisions in other statutes. So you can have, for example, a whistleblower provision in some other government action, in a state law, for example. You could have whistleblower protections. We don't necessarily carve out specifics for that. But for example, if you reported um, maybe some sort of sexual harassment, you're protected from any kind of retaliation. So those are kind of whistleblower protections as well. So when we're talking about, for example, Enron, WorldCom, those kinds of cases, I was very new into my legal career when those broke. But I would say we have to remember that how the media portray something and what language they use doesn't always line up exactly with the statute. So just remember that whistleblower is probably a more common term that is broader, but when you get to the actual statute, it might be retaliation or some other protection.
kind of like calling everything Kleenex when in fact, it's a bathroom tissue.
Exactly. Right.
Not a Kleenex. Um, FCA actions dominate the list of pharmaceutical settlements. And I'm thinking of the guy with the black curly hair that got a bunch of years for raising the prices. Do you remember him?
Oh, are you
Wasn't
talking
it a
about
New York case?
Martin Shkreli, I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
is
yeah.
about right. Yeah, that raised I think he raised them on HIV drugs, right? I
Yeah.
think that was him. Again, not always as easy recall on the news. There's so much of this these days, but you can see that is a good example of a lot of the whistleblower does involve Medicare, Medicaid, healthcare, right? Because the government's funding is deeply attached to those programs. And then where we're seeing, and we're going to get into this now, is, and I'm throughout the program, is one of the big ones we're seeing right now is with the government spending on education. So the Harvard case is grounded in the FCA.
Okay. And then in just the years since my son was born in 1987 to 2019, $62 billion has been recovered, which is a lot of money.
Yeah.
So educate, here we go. False Claims Act. What do you do first? And first, in Nancy's notes, she said, find an attorney. And not only an attorney, but the right kind of attorney.
An attorney who does have specific experience with the False Claims Act. And again, something Chris and I were talking about in the warm-up, as I mentioned this to one of my colleagues who I know does a lot of white-collar defense. And he said, yes, they do have a few people in his office who have handled some of those cases, but unless you're working with clients who do a lot of government contracting, you're probably not seeing very many of these cases. And even though the numbers that you see are huge, as far as the billions of dollars that have been recovered under the FCA, the claims are probably relatively rare. So those numbers are big numbers attached to a handful or maybe a few handful, right, of cases, because what we do tend to see is it might be, for example, overcharging the government for certain things. Like we all know the cases of, the $200 ballpoint pen or something along those lines. So that's,
Toilet seats come to mind.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
Toilet seats. There was a thing
Right.
about, yeah.
Yeah, and there have been, and then you can see in the pharmaceutical industry, I can remember when I was a kid, they broke up the hospitals and the insurance companies to a large degree because of the $100 aspirin, and that was back in probably the early 80s or late 70s, right? So it's that kind of thing that is so blatant that I think they want people to definitely bring up. But the reason I said have the attorney is because the attorney is going to be able to help you line up the evidence to find out if you even have a case. Now, there are provisions that would protect you from retaliation for suspecting some sort of fraud and alerting the government. There is protection for that. But in order to make sure that that protection is at its highest, it's probably best to have an attorney who is skilled in this particular area to make sure that that protection again is the highest possible, because these cases can become very challenging.
And can the whistleblower remain anonymous? And it was my understanding that they can remain anonymous to the public, but not to the court. Is that correct?
Yeah, probably. So in other words, if you're filing any kind of complaint, there's going to need to be an investigation. And in order to do the investigation, they need to know who filed the complaint. They need to talk to you about what you know. So I think that's what you're getting at. But as far as going beyond the tip, you might be able to carve yourself out of it.
Okay.
And again, that's the other reason I said going to an attorney for this is also very important, because the attorney can make sure that your job is protected, help you flesh out what evidence you need to turn over. And I say that because there are definitely situations where you're working for an employer, and in most of these cases, it's some sort of government contract or government funding, right? So you're working for a relatively large employer. You might be part of the decision-making team, and that's how you become aware that something's amiss. And so one of the other reasons you want to have a conversation with an attorney is to make sure that you don't get implicated.
Yeah. And then there's that word again, Ketam.
Yeah, I've always heard it quit ham. Um, but eat ham, quit ham, potato, potato.
And the full phrase is quictam ex regis, meaning filing a lawsuit on behalf of the king, the regis, but in this case, it's on behalf of the government. So citizens can alert the government about fraud is what that means
Right,
in a nutshell.
right.
And then disclosure statement. This is part of every discovery process is the disclosure statement.
Yeah.
And so what's important about that?
This is again going back to what kind of evidence do you want to disclose? I haven't again, I haven't handled any of these cases, so I'm educating myself on this because until this year, we really didn't see it definitely go into the areas that we're seeing it. The biggest reason we're doing this particular webinar is because there is a specific target on DEI programs. And that's another reason I'll go back to again, the disclosures. You're going to be sharing a lot of internal information. You may have signed a confidentiality clause, right? Or a confidentiality agreement when you started your job, and you may be then now in a position where you're blowing the whistle on your employer. So you want to have somebody walk you through that. But I want to go back to something else just on the Quitam is when we're talking about this, allowing the individuals, allowing the citizens to file, something that I thought was kind of important to recognize is that one of the reasons you have this, and all of us have it as citizens of this country, is that we're presumably paying taxes. We're participating in government. And this is part of what we're all waking up to, is that we have to be a little bit more involved. So I'm not necessarily, going to get on my soapbox, but I do want you to understand that part of this is the government has a fiduciary duty to us as the citizens. So that's where this kind of comes in, is we're basically saying, hey, somebody's stealing our money. Right? So that's where this whole idea of Quitam comes from, is that you are entrusting the government with your money, right? You pay into the tax system, et cetera, and then you hold them accountable for using that money responsibly. So that's something else to consider, is this is one process, but obviously there are a lot of others. And again, this is all new to see this applied in DEI programs and education. So, and other forms of funding, because we're seeing it with public radio and other public media as well. So this is definitely something we're anticipating some more activity on.
Okay, so be informed. Is it criminal or civil, or can it be both?
It could be both, depending on how bad it is, because the other thing is that there could be, in any situation, right? We see it all the time where maybe there's not enough evidence to prove a criminal case, because with criminal cases, we tend to look for intent. And sometimes there's not the intent to defraud, but there's the convenient consequence of, oh, we're getting extra money from the government, so let's not say anything. And maybe they can't prove it in the same way. So sometimes a civil action could flesh out some of the same issues. And again, you see it all the time. One of the biggest ones that you can think of in relatively recent years is in the criminal case of O.J. Simpson. Then
I
they
was
weren't
just
able,
gonna say OJ, he was
right? So he was um, found innocent, right? They were unable to convict him for a criminal case, but then he was still sued civilly. And I believe we've seen that with some other cases, but I'm not going to mention them because I know that right now we're all at risk for raising too many issues that might be
Well,
too
and
current.
it is unfortunately true. So let's get to the activate part, what you can do. So, employees, if you're internal, what can you do and when do you do it?
Yeah, so it's back to the same thing as if you suspect something, you're protected to share what you know, because there is protection from retaliation, but understand that it is a legal proceeding, and in order to basically for the government to take action, right? Because most of the time this is coming under some sort of contract, something that the government has already agreed to. And at least in past years, it was, hey, there's a contract, we're going to honor our contract because we don't want to get sued. Um, so typically that's how this works. And so I just understand that what you think is a slam dunk might not be. That's why I say it's okay to share what you know. If you think something is amiss, that funds are being used inappropriately, it would, again, it might be in the current environment that we're in. It might be, for example, that you believe that there has been money allocated to your department from the federal government and you're in higher education, for example, and you are an investigator of complaints, because this is what we're really seeing, right? Like this is effectively the Harvard case and some of the other universities and colleges that are being scrutinized and investigated. Because they get money from the federal government for higher education, they're supposed to be using it, for example, to protect the rights of all students, all employees, regardless of any of those Title VII categories. And if you feel like, for example, something happened in your workplace and you fall within one of these taking federal money, and you feel like maybe they didn't investigate your claim because of your characteristics, then that's where the False Claims Act is currently being used, like, to investigate and potentially withdraw funding from various higher educational institutions. So you can report it. And you ask, when do you do it? Do it when you have enough that's a little bit beyond a suspicion, right? So if you have some sort of evidence, and that might mean it's an email that got circulated. It could be a conversation you were privy to, because this is where I've seen it happen as a lawyer. It is where there was an email saying, oh, that person is this particular characteristic. And so, we're not going to worry about them. We're more worried about the other person because of their protected class. I think that's where we're going to see it in this DEI space. Or it might be that you're in charge of purchasing and you notice that you all are buying product for a certain amount, and then you're tripling or quadrupling or 10 times or 100 times and then charging the government that might be something. Or like you were talking about earlier with the alligator Alcatraz, the detention center for immigrants. Maybe you're working for that organization that's supplying the food, and you want to call attention to that. I'm not sure if that will work the same way, but you do still have the right to raise that. Also, why I said get the attorney to walk you through it, because again, it might be in your best interest to have legal counsel when blowing the whistle. Even though you have the right intentions, it doesn't mean it's going to be investigated exactly the way you think. So it's never a bad idea to have an attorney help you with a
I'm
whistleblower
gonna go ahead with
complaint.
that. What about HR? How does HR get involved in this, or should they?
I would say it depends on, like, if it is a DEI issue, HR is clearly involved. But I've also worked on plenty of cases where it was HR's mishandling of a complaint that has caused the new complaint, right? So maybe there had been a complaint, it was a couple of employees in conflict, they were both in protected classes, one got prioritized over the other by HR, and the person that's then coming and complaining is not going to be comfortable going back to HR under those circumstances. So in that situation, I would say probably, again, talk to an attorney about who the next best person is to talk to in the organization. Sometimes it takes a letter from the attorney saying, hey, you didn't protect this person's rights. And so that's where it's maybe not directly a False Claims Act situation. It's a little bit of an HR and might not even fall under the False Claims Act because I'm not really hearing anything directly related to the government funding. But again, we're in a world where some of this is coming in indirectly. And that's again where I think having somebody try to protect you first and foremost is what I'm concerned with, and then moving beyond that into the issue. If it is a purchasing, funding, where then, basically the numbers aren't matching up, then you may just have to go directly to file with the government on the False Claims Act, right? Just file it right through the online form. Because if it's operational, for example, right? Who do you go to? You're not, most of us don't have direct access to the CEOs at our organizations. So you can try that route, but there's a good chance that the CEO has also made that decision, and the board of directors has been involved in that. And so I guess the bottom line is, how is HR involved? Maybe not at all. And probably in a False Claims Act, it's not. The only distinction I would make is the DEI component. But at that point, it's probably HR's involvement. So I hope that answers. I know that's kind of a
Yeah, no,
convoluted
that's
answer.
well, and that's kind of the way it is with a lot of this, is it depends,
Yeah.
because the facts of the case are what drives the case, and the facts vary. A lot of us on these calls are consultants, DEI consultants. What should they be on the lookout for, or what, where would they maybe want to advise one of their DEI clients to get some legal advice or get some help? What are there some warning things that they should be keeping an
Yeah,
eye
I
on?
think knowing the people that are on this call regarding the False Claims Act, I think this is really where we're going with it. Is this is what interests us, and it is because we are anticipating that some of our clients are going to be targeted for investigations based on their stand on DEI. In that situation, this is where we're also anticipating more work, for better, for worse, right? Because it puts a lot back on us to help them get it right in an environment that seems to be continuing to change. So if you are a consultant and you recognize that there is something that could be interpreted as, back to the one of our earlier sessions, is it clearly discriminatory, right? Are you basically excluding any particular group of people, especially under those Title VII categories, right? If it's based on any of that, flag it, talk to your client about reworking how they're implementing that DEI initiative. At that point, you've put them on notice. I would say this is what I would tell most of my clients, although I'm not giving legal advice. I'm never giving legal advice on these webinars, but I would say the general information that I want you to have is that you better be documenting everything at that point. So if you've put your client on notice that you see some areas of the DEI program that could subject them to an investigation under the False Claims Act because they are a government contractor or they're receiving federal funds. Document it so that you don't become the fall guy. That's really what it comes down to. It puts you in a difficult situation for your client, but we have to do this as lawyers all the time as well. And as consultants, I'm assuming you're doing this, is that sometimes
So
you give advice that your clients don't want to take. Just make sure you've documented. Today I spoke to Chris. Here's what we talked about, right? And then you date it and you put it in a memo to file in case you ever need to defend yourself as, but like here's the reality of it. Your client gets in trouble with the federal government. It's going to cost them a lot of money. They're going to look for somebody else's pocket to put their hand in to help pay for that. And you don't want it to be yours.
no, even if you've got little teeny tiny pockets,
It's true.
it doesn't
True.
matter if you've got little pockets. So
Because you may also have insurance, right? And that's
true,
another thing that I
that's
see all
true.
the time, right? You may have insurance. And this is a quick opportunity to just say, hey, you might even want to find out from your insurance carrier, what type of coverage would you have in that kind of situation? Is there protection for you? And if not, should you consider getting some? We're in an,
Because I would imagine
again,
most of us have errors and omissions.
right.
And because of Spectra's business, we also have cybersecurity insurance.
Yeah.
Although we've never had an issue, but you just don't know
Yeah.
when somebody, could break in, and I don't know what they would do, but I have insurance for it just in case.
Yeah.
So
And that's one of those things that you want to have it, right? Because obviously you're trying to protect your business, but that also can make you a target for, that chain of liability in a lawsuit. But it's much better to have it. Another quick thing that a lot of people don't know is that most of those policies will have what we call a duty to defend clause, which means if you do get a lawsuit filed against you, your insurance carrier will appoint counsel that is skilled in the type of claim that you're being sued for. So that's also a reason that I tell people it's sometimes worth getting a little extra insurance if only for that duty to defend clause, but you need to find out if it's in your policy.
I just wrote a note to myself. Check insurance, duty to defend. Okay, potential dangers and wins. So there's risks. You could lose in court. Wins, you could get a bunch of money if the government is on your side. If they're part of the suit, then you would get 25%, 30% if the government does not intervene. And obviously the goal is to stop the fraud from continuing.
Right.
So anything else stand out in this one for you, Nancy?
Well, I think we need to go back to what fraud is. So this is why I also said you want an attorney guiding you because, okay, yes, you have some protection from retaliation if you put forth a good faith claim, right? So in other words, we don't want you just saying, oh, we know that the administration is hostile to certain types of groups, so I'm going to jump on the bandwagon and try and name a bunch of people I don't like and get them into trouble. You don't have protection from that. Okay, that's still filing a fraudulent claim. So you wouldn't have protection from that. But then when you look at you're telling the federal government that there's something potentially fraudulent where they're being fleeced effectively, right? Somebody stealing, my employer stealing from you, federal government. In that situation, this is where I said the evidence is kind of up here for a lot of these cases, because to prove fraud, you usually have to prove intent. And that means that it has to be willful. Your employer has to have either known that they were doing something wrong or should have known based on the type of work that it was. And so just understand that there is a risk that if you're not doing it with good faith, if you're not doing it with at least some sort of evidence to back your suspicion, you might not have the retaliation protections. And that's why I wanted you to understand a little bit more of this is not just an opportunity for you to get an employer in trouble that you hate, or any government contractor that you hate, or a competitor that you don't like, right? So just understand that. There is potential to get some of the money back. You basically get a cut if the government does recover. But if not, if you don't want your name in it, and some of us rightfully so, that's okay too. So that's where you have to weigh the risks and benefits for you personally. So there is a potential win, but there's also a lot of risk depending on your position in the organization. Because like I said, you might have it turned back around on you, unfortunately. I have seen that happen in cases where people have raised issues, not necessarily in a False Claims Act case, but there are definitely situations where somebody raises an issue and then it's disproven, and it's hard, but just human nature doesn't mean it's right, but it definitely means it could turn around of, well, Chris, that was your department. You're the one that made that decision. So you have to consider what your role is in that. And I can use the perfect example that we use in law school all the time is you may be working for a senior partner and you're working really well for them, and it's a great opportunity for you to work your way up, so you don't want to rock the boat, and the senior partner tells you to do something unethical and you do it because that's your boss. That doesn't fly. So that's why I said if you are somehow involved in the decision making, it's a slightly different risk for you than the average employee.
Well, and there's also, to me, part of it is living your values.
Right.
I quit a company once. It's actually, I've had two jobs in my entire, or two professional jobs in my entire career, not counting waitressing, serving tables. But one of them, I quit because I disagreed with some of their policies, and I just couldn't work there anymore. So I left. Um, so how, so, what you do or do not do in terms of being a whistleblower is also connected to your values and
Right.
what you're willing to stick up for, stand up for, make a little, noise about.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point too, is that there are definitely situations where it's gray enough that you're not really sure what to do, which is the other reason you consult an expert. And what an attorney can do for you in that situation, or at least somebody that's got some experience with this. Maybe you do know somebody else that's been involved in a whistleblower complaint. Maybe it's just reading up on it, reading case law, something like that, depending on how nerdy you are, right? But there is something to be said for your action after you discover the potential defrauding of the government. It does have a lot to say about your values, but it also has something to say about the organization as well, right? So again, we're talking values and we're talking about allowing something to continue. So what you might do, for example, is realize you don't want to work for somebody because of what they're doing. They're charging people an outrageous amount for prescription drugs, and you know that that's wrong, or you feel like that's wrong. Then you may want to find out if you have a whistleblower complaint, And then you can have somebody guide you through the process of protecting your job while this is going on, or finding another job. And then what is the statute of limitations for filing that whistleblower complaint? What is the right timing for that as well? So that's the procedural stuff that sometimes I think people forget about when it comes to working with a lawyer and working on a particular legal claim, is there are deadlines for certain things. And there is the potential of evidence to disappear, right? Also, if you wait too long. So that's why you might want to go to an attorney for that expert guidance in an FCA case. But again, I'm not an FCA attorney, so I'm just giving you some general information on how to navigate this, because we are anticipating for the first time in my career, FCA being involved in DEI and employment issues.
And we kind of, this is the, to be a leader, what can you do? And we kind of covered this already in the previous slide, but legal review, I'm just reading from notes here. Similarly, if you train or consult with one of these organizations, legal review of the DEI programs is critical. Of course, collecting data to show the impact of programs was important before this year, but it becomes even more important now to identify inequities, assess effectiveness, and document your reasoning. So, yeah, all of that. Anything to add there? And Lee, do you have a question?
I do actually. I just posted it. Um,
Oh,
and I don't know, I can just kind of read it, or
yeah.
you can all read it.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Uh, You know, given the attacks on DEI and woke, quote unquote, woke organizations, is there a fear that we'll see more of these False Claims Act filed by indirect persons to target companies, whether they're, a true, honest claim, or, because there's money involved, people just, throwing darts essentially. Is there a fear of that happening?
I think you could probably tell, you may have picked up on that, yeah, I'm carefully choosing how to discuss it because,
Mm,
yes, I am somewhat concerned that that could happen.
yeah, I am
Especially
as well. Yeah.
if it's organizations who already have disfavor among certain circles, right?
Right.
Well,
Right.
and it probably, in some cases, it depends on if you're small enough, you're flying under the radar, or if you're, big enough that you've got visibility, there's probably, well, is the little company in just as much danger as the big one? Nancy
I would
nods
say yes.
yes.
I would say yes. Obviously, the dollar value has a lot of impact on how the government has in the past prioritized. I can't say for certain that that's the way they're prioritizing now. And so I think we have to look at both, well, three things in who, and hang on, Lee, and then I want to hear what you have to say about this. So I think we have to look at three things. One is the dollar value, right? That's still going to be a consideration. I think it is whether or not this is an organization that's already in a disfavorable position. Maybe they have certain beliefs that the government doesn't necessarily like. And then there's the third one of, would this be a good example no matter how big or small, right? So there is this, and like this has always gone on. Courts have done this, organizations do this, the media does it. So I don't want to say that this is brand new, but I do think we're seeing it at unprecedented levels, that even a small organization, if they're highly visible and they might make a good example, they could still be targeted even if the dollar value is not huge. So Lee, what do
It
you
makes
think
me
about that?
want to go back and read some books about the McCarthy era. Because all those people that were blacklisted, I mean, those were just individuals,
Mhm.
you know, and I don't know enough about that period of time, but I would guess that it has some good lessons for us today.
Yeah, I want to respond to that real quickly, Lee. Hold your thought. So one difference, I think, when at least with the topic of today, with the False Claims Act, is that we are still talking about government contractors or organizations that get federal funding, right?
Right.
So I think that is one distinction, at least in this. I know there's a broader conversation regarding other areas, but I think as far as the Federal Claims Act, there is still some limitation on how these will play out. It doesn't mean that I don't still believe that it's possible to have a lot of indirect claims filed that may get priority over others. Because think about that strategically as well. And I almost am afraid to say that some of these things out loud, but flooding a docket has also been known to be a way of making a statement, right? So even if those cases don't end up being valid, flooding the docket then keeps other valid cases maybe farther down the line and farther on the back burner. So again, I hate saying that out loud because I don't want anybody to hear that and say, "Ooh, that's a good idea." But I think we have to be prepared for that. So Lee, what do you want to jump in here? Tell us what you're thinking.
So now I have two questions based on what you just said. Um, with those three things you laid out, dollar value, Oregon an unfavorable position, and would it serve as a good example? I think it made me think of, I think Attorney General Pam Bondi, did she ask states attorney generals to provide a list of at least 9 organizations that the DOJ should consider looking at? I think that was in the very early part of, and the due date's already past due, so I haven't heard anything about it. But that just makes me a little concerned right then and there, right? For the
Yeah, there's a
potential
lot of
of
quota.
targeting.
Yeah, there's a lot of quota going on, and
Mhm.
that's always disturbing to me. I think it's disturbing to all of us. And I do vaguely remember seeing something about, there have been so many things flowing,
Mhm.
right? Sometimes it's hard to keep up. And so I think what we want to look at for today is look at taking a look, doing an audit of your programs,
Yeah.
using objective tools. I know Lee, you and Chris both work in that space, helping people gather the information so that you're solving real problems. And I think that's where we're continuing to end up back in that conversation of if you're solving real problems that are backed by objective data, you're a lot less likely to be well, you might not avoid scrutiny entirely, but you'll be able to survive that scrutiny if you have that objective data. And you're again, I love that people and organizations want to try to heal past wrongs, but we just can't do it in the performative ways that we were doing, right? And I think that's what we keep coming back to, that part of the conversation. It doesn't mean we can't keep doing the work. We just have to be very strategic and very cautious with how we do it.
And you had
And so
another point?
yeah, you may have just answered my question, Nancy, which was from a self-serving perspective. Um, I'm wondering if, again, we've talked about it last week, not specifically to false claims acts, but, and I think you answered, likely that if somebody underwent proactively a civil rights audit or a DEI audit or some other kind of audit, that it may not take them out of the crosshairs, but it would certainly help their case if it ever made it in front of a court, or it may be enough that if it's public knowledge that they're undergoing an audit, maybe they'll be left alone because they know that it's, you know, there is going to be objective data coming, if not already established.
Yeah. And I think you can look at the Harvard case, for example, and they knew they were going to be investigated by the DOJ. They knew this False Claims Act action was in play, and they tried to get out ahead of it. And I think you're going to see a lot of organizations do that. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I would love to see more of them use people like Chris and you to get that objective data and try to solve real problems and look for the things that were in their blind spots, because we all have them, right? Every organization has them. And I think that's something else to remember is it doesn't make you a terrible person. It's just right now, or a terrible organization for that matter. It's just right now we need to be looking at all of these things to make sure that we're implementing in a way that is not excluding. I think that's the number one thing, is because you can't have inclusion if you're excluding. And that's going to be an ongoing issue. And I think that's the first and foremost element that you need to look for. And then you all can help them dive into a little bit more.
So, Lee, if you want to put your LinkedIn or something in the chat, if anybody wants to follow up with Lee, doing his work, that would be good. I should have put it in here. So there's a few legal DEI resources. And can I put can you put them, can you grab them, Nancy, and put them in the chat?
Oh, I can actually, I have a copy of the slide presentation. Let me see if I can grab it that way. It might be easier.
Okay. And then I want to let everybody know the ones that are coming up. We've got DEI statements, protecting them in August. Working from home. Do you have your your go bag ready? And we just talked about adding another topic on union versus non-union as it relates to DEI. The other one is we were kind of talking about on this one, in this session, about segregation 2.0, how policies divide work and education. And I know you've spoken about this before, Nancy. And then FCC and DEI. And this is a new one that's coming up. And this was part of what the Stephen Colbert losing his job was part of. That is the FCC is now going to be in charge of. Can you fill us in
You
on
need me
that
to
one,
explain that a
Nancy?
little bit?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so basically this is another thing that we're seeing is that the federal government has to approve certain mergers, right? And so that's what's happening, I think, is I haven't read a lot about this, but I'm getting educated on this in the past few days because of what
Mhm.
happened with Colbert. Is there are certain you see it in the news all the time. There's certain mergers that the federal government has to approve because they're either under the FCC, right? So they're media, or it might be that it's under an anti-monopoly, right?
Oh,
So an
yeah,
antitrust, right?
right.
So that's how the government then has some power to avoid like two airlines coming together and having too few competitors. So they'll get involved in certain business transactions like that because of the size of them. And then what we saw, arguably, I know it's still under investigation, is that the FCC can then they can strong arm certain organizations to make concessions. And we've seen that in a lot of different situations where the government agencies, which are part of the executive branch of the federal government, have some ability to strong arm organizations into making choices that they might not make if they were left to their own devices. So I hope that answered your question.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
Again, being very careful with this because it is so nuanced. And I think that's the other thing that we're going to continue to see is that anywhere there is a loophole, there's probably going to be somebody trying to get through it.
So any other questions?
I'm almost afraid of your questions, but please bring them.
There's one from Lee, there's Nancy, no other questions. So thank you one and all. I keep trying I thought this one would go shorter, but apparently there was more to say than
You
we
cursed us, but I think I would like to just kind of close, if you don't mind, Chris,
Sure.
with we really are trying to reassure you. This is very chaotic and we understand that. But there are still a lot of things that you can do. We just may have to do it as a team. And I think if anything, that's advisable to do things in collaboration with each other because there's so much more that we can get done that way. And quite frankly, a lot of the things that are going on that are they were done in collaboration and a long-term collaboration, multidisciplinary. So that's the other thing that we're trying to do here. We're trying to educate you the best we can, knowing that these are sometimes moving targets. And we want to activate you to join together. You can see like Chris and Lee arguably could be competitors, but they offer some different nuances. And we're going to need a lot of us out there doing this work. So we invite you to collaborate with each other, get in touch with each other, take some sort of action. I've found that doing even the small actions also, they not only help me lead other people, right? Like we're trying to do here, but it also helps me manage my own concerns around what's going on. Because if anything, I'm not going down without a fight.
Yeah, me as well. Yeah, no, I'm sticking with DEI. I wanted it to be my last career was going to be DEI, and I'm still working towards that. So, but yes, and I think Lee, didn't you meet Nancy through one of? Yes.
through this group, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's I think I used to work with this one director, and he was way more experienced than I was in directing for video. And whenever I called him and I said, Mark, how do you do this? He goes, oh, it's so easy, I'll tell you. And he would just share his secrets because he said, it all comes back, it all comes back to why would I keep that a secret? It's something easy. Chris, you can do it. It's cheap. You got the skills. Go for it. And that's always been the kind of collaborator that I want to be, is if somebody needs something, I hope to be able to say, I know exactly who you should talk to. Go, here's the contact, give this person a call, check it out. And so yeah,
And that is our invitation.
teamwork
Right?
makes the dream work. Isn't that somebody's slogan?
I think so. Yeah.
I don't know whose. Sorry if I stole something from you.
And we invite any of you to reach out if you need anything.
Absolutely.
We have resources, we have each other, we'll do what we can.
And other
I think that that's
connections
a big
if we're
part
not the right person, right? To Chris's
Oh,
point,
absolutely.
there's people that specialize in certain things. So I'll be the first to tell you I'm not comfortable doing something, but I'll try to find out who would be
Absolutely.
best.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So
So
I'm
don't
going
give
to
up, keep
stop
coming
sharing.
back if nothing else. We're going to keep trying to keep ourselves our energy up and keep us active so that we're at least making some progress.
Thank you, everyone, for your
Thank
time.
you.
And thank you, Nancy. Glad to see you, Lee.